Managers of Reddit, what's the fastest you've had a new hire quit? My uncle retired and, after some time had went by, he decided to get a part-time job at a bait store for some extra spending money. The afternoon boss told him to be there at 8 am. But when he showed up at 7:45 am and knocked on the door to be let in, the morning boss told him that he was 15 minutes late. The guy started to get in his case about how he was expected to be there a half hour before his shift to straighten up and restock shelves. My uncle told him he could take his job and shove it up his butt. He was back on the road by 7:48. And your uncle was well right to do so. I'm not going to work a half hour off the clock for anything. I was the manager at a diesel truck shop in college. My boss hired a mechanic who was supposed to have all his own tools. Dude shows up with a toolbox the size of a lunchbox on his start day. He made up some story about slowly bringing his tools over every day because his car was small. Whatever. I put him on an easy job replacing a thermostat on a medium duty pickup truck. The book time on this job was like an hour. My day had gotten busy and I realized that like 3 hours has passed and homeboy hasn't even come in to even grab the new thermostat from me yet. So I go out to check on him and couldn't believe what I was seeing. The intake was off. The radiator was removed. All the coolant hoses were removed and sitting in a cardboard box. There was coolant and oil all over the floor. It was totally insane. The mechanic had taken some drugs apparently and was on a different planet, rolling around under the truck. No reason to be doing this whatsoever to replace the thermostat on this truck. His phone was blasting the Redneck Kings of Comedy and he was covered in sunflower seed shells that he had spit all over himself. I turned off his phone and asked him what the frick was going on, and he started crying, saying he couldn't figure out where the dang thermostat was. I told him to go the frick home. It took one of my other mechanics like 2 hours to undo all the destruction he had done and we had to put all new fluids in the truck because this dodo drained them all out into dirty pans all over the floor and all of 30 minutes to replace the thermostat and get the truck back to the customer. My boss had hired this idiot, so I told him to call and fire him. The next day, he showed up to collect his paycheck for 3 hours of destruction and his lunchbox filled with tools. He made apologies, stole our yard dog that had lived at the shop for years, and we never saw him again. It was kind of sad and endearing right up until he stole the yard dog. I used to work at a really small grocery store that usually only had one manager and one cashier in the store at all times. I had put up my 2 weeks notice and prior to leaving trained up the new manager to take my place. The next day after I left from what I was told, the manager quit 2 hours into their first solo shift, leaving the poor cashier behind who had been there even less time than the new manager. Only one manager and one cashier on duty. So, Walmart. Zing. I once needed a new graphic designer in my unit, so I, as was procedure, told HR what I needed and they came back in a couple weeks with someone they had hired. He met us all, sat down and was very confused. He was an accountant, not a graphic designer. They had hired him as an accountant and asked him lots of accounting questions. Nothing at all to do with the position. HR was called. He left with them. I never saw him again. I hope they kept him on as an accountant. Any company where HR does the hiring for a skilled position without the group team leader present is a no-go for me. The first day, I worked at a phone store in a very Hispanic neighborhood. He claimed to be fluent in Spanish in the interview. I probably should have verified that. He learned pretty quickly that he'd really need the Spanish, so he got super stressed and stormed off. I later found out he took a $900 Camo Galaxy S5 with him when he left. Gee, let me just leave my SSN and all my personal info with this place, then rob them of a $900 piece of technology. I have had a number of construction laborers quit on the first day, including several roofing laborers who started at 7 am, climbed down the ladder for 10 am break, and never came back. I did that. What I was told the job was going to be was not the job they wanted me to do. Painting equals roofing. Frick if I am going to do roofing for minutes wage. Hired a delivery driver, construction materials. First day he had a 26-foot box truck and 3 stops in the Frederick MD market, about 2 hours from our warehouse. He leaves at 7 am and is back at 11:30 am. I see him and say, wow, that was really fast. He says he's going to get some cigarettes and will be right back in. Gets in his car and leaves. We open the truck and everything is still there, exactly as loaded. He doesn't answer his phone and never comes back. We never found out what happened. For the next 6 months, anytime anyone in the warehouse was having a bad day, they'd say, "I'm going to get cigarettes." He just really wanted to drive the truck around. Employee here. Had a guy get hired, was sent to get his drug test, and never came back. We tell them about the drug test when they fill out an application and also when they interview. Those were the worst drugs he'd ever tested. He didn't even get high. The fastest was the one who was a no-show their first day. It's all good. About 8 months later they contacted us to say they were ready to come to work. I used to manage a grocery store. We had to come in at 6 AM to start throwing the loads and getting the store ready for the day. Had a new hire come in 5 minutes late on her first day, at 6:05, just to give me her locker key and tell me that she has never woken up this early in her life and that she can't do the job. Used to work overnight stocking in a grocery store. Watched several people quit a few hours into their first shift. Apparently they just assumed they could handle how tired they'd get. I worked at a prison. We had a woman come and get hired for her first day, which is where we start the fingerprint scan to upload data to the feds and do your physical and TB test. She had gone down and not come back after 3-4 hours. We called down to see what was up. Turns out she was wanted 2 states over for identity theft and was now being housed at intake. 15 minutes. I hired someone to work in a manufacturing plant. We did a tour of how hot the floor would be during the interview. No problem. First day at work, he walked out after 15 minutes of work because it was too hot. To be fair, strolling through a hot place and working in a hot place is totally different. I'm not a manager, but one time I went on vacation for a week. I came back and a few days later heard people talking about Frank or something. Had no clue who that was. So I asked. Apparently he'd been hired, started working, stopped coming in, and apparently quit, was fired all in the week I was on vacation. They tried to replace you but it didn't work out. We hired a girl for a live-on job. I worked on a university campus. She was hired, drove down like 3-4 hours, began her first day, apparently got some other offers that were closer to home, realized she made a huge mistake, packed her stuff and was gone that evening. Dang wizards. I was a quitter. Sorry. I went to interview at my dream job. Came home crying because I thought I had bombed the interview. Called up the grocery store that had offered me a job as soon as you get into town. The next morning, I go in and do the training exercises and start learning to scan groceries. The HR person who was in charge of my paperwork and training went home without telling me. So after a while of what do I do next? Do I have a boss? I've been here 6 hours. Am I supposed to take a lunch? I got a phone call from the museum saying I got the dream job. I rushed out of there so fast I had to hang the grocery store apron on the cart return because I accidentally took it with me. Not technically me, but a manager in our company was struggling to hire someone at one location. I bumped into an old friend I used to be a server with, and she said she was unemployed and looking. Linked them up. First day she came in and said, "Yay, this isn't for me. I'm more of a manager personality," and quit that same day. B, you don't have a job and I gift wrapped one for you at one of our best locations. We've had store managers ask for a demotion because they made more money as a clerk than they did as a manager. It's not about the money, it's about being able to delegate to other people. We hired a machinist in training for our injection mold building division. Guy had run some CNCs before, but on a production basis. Basically we'd need about 6 months to switch him over. When he started we were balls the wall busy. All machines were dirty because you'd have 3 or 4 being run by one guy. His first task was to clean out one of the machines so he could get working with it. That seems below me. When I drive Uber no one expects stupid chores from me. He made it less than 30 minutes. Honestly, in the 15 years I've been around this industry, I could tell you another 30 or so stories. Out of all the jobs with machines, I like cleaning the best. You can't really frick that one up. How about a story about the opposite? An employee refusing to be fired? I wasn't there when this happened but I shared an office with this legend for a couple of years. It was a governmental agency and they had hired a new supervisor. This particular employee and the new supervisor just did not get along. It was like oil and water, cats and dogs. Constant friction between them. For no reason and for every reason. He got wind that she was planning to fire him in a day or two. So he stopped going to work. Figured that if she couldn't find him, she couldn't fire him. He refused to answer his phone. He refused to return messages. This was before email was widespread, but I'm sure he would have ignored that too. And then a miracle happened. The supervisor got fired a couple of weeks after he stopped coming into work. The new acting supervisor, who was the person who hired me, actually called this guy and told him it was safe to come back to work. So he did. BTW, this acting supervisor was a great guy. After I had been there less than a year, and consequently didn't have much leave built up, I had a very serious health issue. It kept me out of work for an entire month. After my vacation and sick leave ran out, he just started marking me as being present with the understanding that I would work every extra shift possible when I got back to pay back the time. It was one of the nicest things anyone has ever done for me. I left that job years and a year ago, but saw on Facebook a couple of years ago that the legend retired with a full pension. And here I thought that he'd return to work and get fired by the new manager. I worked at a place where I didn't get to hire the interns, but had to manage them. My VIP just hired pretty women. There were great interns and terrible ones, but Beth took the cake. She came in 30 minutes late. I started to take her through how our business worked, what our industry was like and what she'd be working on. She was on her phone and got pee when I told her to put it away. She refused to take notes while I took her through all this. I then sat her down at 10:30 and asked her to clean a list of potential clients in Excel. She laughed and said she was getting a coffee, which I assumed was from our office. 45 minutes later she shows up again with a Starbucks, and 20 minutes after that she says she's going on lunch. I told her she used her lunch up to get that coffee. She need to get some work done. She laughed again and left. Didn't come back the rest of the day. I sent a note to her professor about this. The next morning I got a call from her professor apologizing for her behavior and letting me know she would be failing her internship. My VIP was P because Beth seemed like just the kind of person we need around here. We had an intern start who had been emailing us 24/7 for months asking for work experience, how it was their passion, etc etc. They also interviewed really well at the informal coffee interview we had with him, where we explained what the internship would entail. They arrived early for day one, seemed really positive during the morning induction. We got them set up with a desk and their email login, etc. When it got to lunch, we told them they had just over an hour. They were welcome to go out and get lunch and eat it outside, or in our canteen. It was up to them. He said he would go out and get some lunch and see us back in a bit. He never came back. We got really worried. He wouldn't pick up his mobile. We went looking for him. We emailed him, and then we had to call his emergency contact, just in case he had been hit by a bus or something. We eventually got a text message from him that just said, "Sorry, I don't think I'll be coming back." Not a manager, but I work for a decently popular e-commerce store. Despite our store's popularity, our headquarters location was pretty run down at the time. We had a new social media manager start, and on her third or fourth day she went to use the bathroom and accidentally walked in on our copywriter pooping. Bathroom door didn't always lock properly. She quickly went back to the main office, grabbed her bag, and we never heard from her again. As someone looking to get into social media management marketing, finding one of my new co-workers pooping would only be a hilarious benefit. Not the manger, but we had a guy show up his first day, after tons of testing, and a paid for flight, just to refuse to clean toilets. He said he would clean everything else but not the toilets. He was a janitor. They bought him a ticket back home. I was hired to work in a stockroom once. I didn't need a job at the time but fancied a bit of extra money. Second shift I got threatened with the sack cause I went to the toilet 3 times in an 8-hour shift. Apparently I should have told them I had a freaking bladder problem on my application. Boss was a generally enormous turd in a few other ways too, but when I didn't need the job and was getting brought into her room to watch CCTV footage of me heading to the bathroom every few hours, I was like, yeah, nah. I didn't need a job at the time but fancied a bit of extra money. Best kind of job to have. Or decide not to have. We hired a guy in a restaurant. He no crap quit in 30 minutes. He was lazy and slow and realized that we all hustled harder than he was willing. We had a good laugh. Called the second on the list, who showed up 45 minutes later and worked a double. That guy stayed there for a year and loved his job. I used to work at a community mental health center. Once we had a new front office person come in for her first day, leave for lunch, and never come back. I actually did this once. Got hired as a dental assistant, started my first day, and the place was a nightmare. The dentist literally let her dog run around the office and crap on the floor. Aseptic procedures were basically non-existent. Expired and unlabeled materials everywhere. I didn't want to be liable for any of the inevitable fallout, so I just bailed. This summer I got a job as a lifeguard at a certain pool, since the one I really wanted to work wasn't going to interview me till the end of June. First day, manager says they're planning on having me work about 20 hours a week, but for most of June I have to scrounge all my hours off other people because I joined up too late to be put on that month's schedule. Fair enough. I interview for the other pool which is within walking distance and they offer me $10.75 an hour compared to first place offering me state minimum. At that time $9.25 with an imminent increase to $10.10. They want 5 days of my week, however, so I agree to not have a dang day off in my week and plan to have 10-hour shifts at my old job on the 2 leftover days so I can still fulfill the 20 hours. I tell old job boss and he's peeved because apparently despite hiring 3 or so guards after me, my new arrangement means he'll be understaffed and that he was planning on giving me more hours. I felt like it was balls meant to keep me stuck there more, but I threw him a bone and texted him asking how many hours a week minimum he needed from me to fix his understaffing issue. He doesn't respond for a full 21 hours. When he finally does, it's to ask me to come in early with no actual answer. In the meantime, new job offered me 40 hours a week if I quit the old job, and I fricked off immediately and enjoyed a summer working at a pool within walking distance of my house and with much better behaved patrons. I don't regret it. This is a great one because it was not a low-tier position. I was working at a pharma manufacturing facility and we were hiring a new HR manager. She got the job, shown her office. Basically this desk is not clean enough and that was that she left. Not a manager but the employee. I quit a job the day before my first scheduled shift when the company I was working my last shift at offered me significantly more money. Almost exact same thing happened to me. I had just learned my girlfriend was pregnant and was ready to start making more money in preparation for that. Found a new job pretty quickly and put in my 2 weeks at the current job. The night before the first day of my new job I was offered quite a bit more money and an extra week of vacation days. Needless to say, I took the offer. Working at Jimmy John's. We hire an older woman to be a delivery driver. We tell her to put an apron on because when you aren't driving, you do in-shop stuff. She said she wasn't going to make sandwiches and left. At my JJ location they paid us under minimum. In shop and on delivery, working as a tipped position made us legally capable of refusing non-tipped work. I work at an investment bank in London. After interviewing an internal candidate different division, floor etc, a couple of times called her to offer the role and let her know the salary we could start her off on. She excitedly accepted. I immediately contacted HR via email to put the official wheels in motion and an hour later she called me back to let me know that she had to retract her acceptance as another internal role she'd interviewed for months ago had suddenly called to offer her that role. No mention of salary, just that she preferred the sound of the other role. A couple of months later I looked her up on the intranet and she's still in her old role. So I'm not sure what happened. A salary negotiation tactic that I didn't bite. Maybe the other role fell through if it existed in the first place. Who knows? A little embarrassing telling HR to ignore my last email though. Probably wasn't about the salary, but the job itself. Or she was advised by someone to not switch. The excuse was definitely made up. I was a supervisor at a grocery store a few years back. A guy I knew from high school got a job at my store and a McDonald's at the same time. He told me that at the end of the month he would quit the job he liked less, The next day he quit from my store. I asked him why he wasn't waiting a month like he planned. Turns out, on his first day at McDonald's, all of the other people on his shift including the manager went out back to smoke and left him running the whole store alone for a couple of hours during the lunch rush. The owner found out and fired everyone except him and promoted him to manager. On his first day, he decided he didn't want to bag groceries after that. I didn't blame him. Once I worked a temp job at a salmon canning factory for a week or two. We got a couple of new temps one day, a girl in her early 20s and a creepy Somalian guy who could have been 25 or 40. Somalian guy spends all day trying to hit on this girl, asking her if she will be his girlfriend within a couple of hours. He then begged her to go on a date with him to McDonald's on our lunch break. I guess he followed her to her car at lunch and started harassing her. She drove off and never came back. There's some real shitbags out there and I feel terrible that women have to put up with people like that. Not a manager but work in an office. This was a few years ago when I was still interning while in college. We had a kid start fresh after graduating college and he was gone 3 days later. He had never worked a job before except being a camp counselor at a hockey camp. He complained that all everyone ever does here is work and that everyone was super old. Yes, we do work during our job. And the average age of his department was like 25. Real life is gonna slap the crap out of him. Worked as an interim assistant manager for a bridal store. We had our amazing manager leave, and the assistant manager that took her place was god awful. I'm talking refused to work even mandatory weekends because there was always a problem with the babysitter for her granddaughter, and we would get written up if we were late. Tried to give me a 0.25 an hour raise after 2 years of raises being frozen. I put in my 2 weeks after that, and I mean that was my response to being offered that. I later found out the district manager had told her to offer me $4, and at one point she refused to hang up the phone with her husband after her lunch, leaving me alone in the store for an hour after my shift and making me late to pick up my son from daycare. She then tried to yell at me for going over hours. All of this is just background to make people understand how crappy of a boss she was. My last week, we had a new hire in alterations come in and do some training. He was only there for 3 hours, and in that 3 hours 2 of the other bridal consultants got into a fight. Not a tiff, a full-on screaming match. That crappy manager moved to the break room and then let them go at it for an hour. I had customers complain, brides leave the store, which not only cost the store money, but the consultants worked on commission. And finally, the new hire came out of alterations, asked me if this was normal, and then said he wasn't going to finish the paperwork because he was confident he could find a job where our long screaming matches didn't occur. He probably wasn't wrong. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.